Welcome back to the Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Really excited about having Carl Pittman on the program. We're going to talk about the rise, the growth of constitutional sheriffs. This idea of constitutional sheriffs. Historically, I think that you have to go pretty far back where people really wondered about the political philosophy of the sheriff candidates. If you go back, 100, and even earlier, there was probably large consensus when it came to the Constitution. Then over time, things like efficiency and efficacy became more important than where they stood philosophically. But because of the concern about, some of our most fundamental civil rights, like the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, there's a lot of talk about where people stand constitutionally when they run for sheriff. Now, Carl Pittman is running for sheriff in Harris County, and he's running as a person who is committed to the idea of being a constitutional sheriff. And Carl Pittman, welcome to the program. How are you today?
I am doing outstanding. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
First of all, what is a constitutional sheriff, just for the listener out there?
Well, it's quite simple. Everything we do, all of our law in this country can be traced back to, of course, the Constitution. Every law enforcement officer, that means sheriff, police officer, constable, state police, federal officer, we all take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution and obey. And so the concept is many people actually take the oath, but they do not follow through with that throughout their professional law enforcement career. So a constitutional sheriff is twofold. Here in Texas, our state constitution mandates that the office exist. So that's the first part. The second part is a sheriff who is going to absolutely strictly adhere to our founding documents. And that's where true constitutional sheriffs come in.
Right, and that isn't just the documents of the county where he's a sheriff or the documents of the state where he's a sheriff, but the U.S. Constitution as well. And that means, in particular, what comes to mind is the Bill of Rights.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. And remember, regardless of your political ideology, most people, whether you're liberal or conservative, like the idea that the government has restrictions placed upon it. And that is really, right. if you think about our documents, the documents really don't place any restrictions on the citizens. This is about placing restrictions on the government. And that is where we need to get back to, and I mean in a big hurry. We need to get back there real quick.
Yeah. And so, a good friend of mine, both me personally and of my radio show, is U.S. Senator Rand Paul. In fact, there's a great interview that he did recently over there at usdailyreview.com from our Price of Business TV show. And, one of the things he talks about is that conservatives generally like to talk about the Second Amendment and the First Amendment. They like both of those quite a bit, but not so much the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. What's your thoughts about that?
Well,
by the way, one of them is, right to seizure, right to not to incriminate yourself, the need for warrants, those type of things. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, our Second Amendment, in my opinion, is that mechanism that has been given to us that, if all else fails, allows us to protect the rest of them. The Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, but primarily the Fourth Amendment, when it comes to law enforcement, really sets the standard and the bar as to what law enforcement or the government can and cannot do. And so, we find it, very important as Americans, as the founding documents talk about our personal effects, our homes. These are things that are very, very near and dear to our hearts as Americans. And we want to make sure that we have a very firm gate between the government and our front door. And so that is why you have to have peace officers, and particularly county sheriffs. The sheriff is the chief elected law enforcement officer in his or her county. And we absolutely have to be the guardian of the gate to make sure that no one comes into our county, whether it's a federal entity or no one within our county, including law enforcement is going to violate that sacred oath that we all took to protect the Constitution.
Yeah, right. And so you see a role of the county sheriff, constitutional sheriffs, protecting people from abuse of any level of government.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are many sheriffs that don't understand the extent of their authority. They believe that somehow the supremacy clause of the federal government gives them supreme power to do whatever they like, and that is absolutely not so. I mean, I would have absolutely no qualms if a federal officer is in this county as sheriff and they violate the law. They will be arrested and dealt with just like anyone else, because there is no special benefit to being a law enforcement officer. In fact, I think we have a much higher responsibility to make sure we do the right thing.
So I'm curious, because I don't know if I've ever heard any from the constitutional sheriff movement, which I consider myself very sympathetic to, talk about, the wholesale collection of information about individuals that's being done by government agencies like NSA. What do constitutional sheriffs think about that? We know what Rand Paul had to say. He saw it as a direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. And I'll remind the listener, if they really want to know the history of the Revolutionary War, they just need to look at the Fourth Amendment and the Second Amendment. It's those two amendments that they came in an odd order, because they're really the first two impetuses that threw the U.S. into the war, with the illegal search and seizure by the British of American guns. And that's what really threw. That's like, forget about tea. We like to talk about tea. It was about mass confiscation of guns by the British that threw us into the Revolutionary War. But talk about that.
Well, as we talk about constitutional sheriffs in this country, I think the absolute the guiding light of that movement is my good friend Sheriff Richard Mack. And Sheriff Mack was here in Houston over this past weekend, along with my good friend Sheriff Joe Arpaio. Both of them came in from Phoenix to support my campaign for sheriff. But Richard Mack, as far as constitutional sheriffs, this man has set the mark. He set the bar. He absolutely understands it. He is the founder of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, which I am a member. There are probably just over 320 or so elected sheriffs across the country. Now, mind you, we've got more than 3,000 counties in all of the states across the country, so just a little over 10% of them have taken that extra pledge as CSPOA members that they are going to stand firm. Now, when you talk about government overreach, let's talk about a lot of things. Let's talk about TSA. Let's talk about the Bureau of Land Management.
But I want you to specifically answer, because there is a large comment on those two things by those of the conservative worldview. I'm interested to find out what your view is on the NSA, the overreach of the NSA, the mass collection of data on individuals.
It is clear, in my opinion, when we look at the Fourth Amendment, to just arbitrarily collect the private information of Americans who have done nothing wrong, have not been accused of doing anything wrong, and more importantly, as it relates to the Fourth Amendment, no probable cause has been presented to a magistrate that has issued a warrant to search to retrieve that data. That is an absolute violation of the Fourth Amendment. And these are the kinds of things that I'm sorry?
It's good to hear that. I wish more constitutional attorneys would advocate that, because, again, I'm very sympathetic to the movement. It's so needed. We need someone in our corner. We've got a government that is absolutely arbitrary, arrogant, and out of control. And so at the most tactical local level, we need all of the support we're going to get. This is why every listener should be checking out the constitutional sheriff movement very, very thoroughly, because I think it offers some promise. And Carl Pittman, thanks so much for being with us. What's a website where we can get more information?
Yeah, please visit Carl, CARL4FOR, Sheriff, SHERIFF.com, carlforsheriff.com. I am I'm a true blue American. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran. I love this country, and I believe that we can absolutely save this, but we've got to quit trying to be so politically correct and do what we know is right. So thank you very much for having me.
You bet. When we come back, we're going to have more for you. Do want to remind you that content here shows up over there at usdatareview.com, and this is the price of business.